Let me ask you something personal. Have you ever felt like the loudest person wins? The one who reacts first, texts longest, pleads hardest? Have you ever been taught, maybe even convinced, that love means giving until you're empty, explaining until your throat dries, staying visible just to prove you mattered? It's not validation. It's not even presence. It's detachment. But not just any kind. I'm talking about dark detachment. Stoic. Silent. Unshakable. The kind of energy that doesn't chase. That it's bitterness or apathy. It's not. It's self-mastery. It's the moment you stop being reactive and start being powerful. This is the shift no one expects. And that's why it works. Because while they're busy trying to read you, decode you, trigger you, you're already gone. Composed. Grounded. Free. We've been conditioned to fear silence. Conditioned to believe that closure has to come with words, that peace comes from being heard. But Stoicism teaches the opposite. Real peace? It comes when you no longer need to be heard at all. Real closure? It's when your silence says everything. And real power? It's when you don't just detach from the chaos, you transcend it. So if you've ever found yourself feeling like you gave too much, waited too long, explained to yourself one more time than you should have, this message is for you. What if I told you that your energy is your currency? And what if you stopped spending it on people who never knew how to invest in you? What if your silence became the very echo that haunted the spaces they now sit in? This isn't about playing games. It's emotional elevation. And I'll be honest with you, this video won't be up forever. So if you're watching this right now, it's for a reason. There's something here your soul has been waiting to hear. Because by the time we reach the end, you won't be thinking about who left you or who didn't value you. You'll be thinking about who you're about to become. And they'll be thinking about the version of you they'll never get to meet again. Stick with me. What comes next might just be the shift you didn't know you needed. 1. The calm that cracks their soul. Have you ever been in a relationship where your calmness was mistaken for weakness, only to discover later that it was the most potent force they had ever encountered? Imagine that the moment your heart stopped begging, your mind stopped pleading, and your soul stopped reacting, something shifted. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't lay down ultimatums or dramatic farewells. You simply became still, composed, almost eerily unbothered. And what struck them wasn't the silence. It was the weight behind it. That stillness cracked something in their soul because they expected chaos. They expected tears, they expected outbursts, they expected devotion turned denial. But instead they got peace. And peace demands reckoning. Because when someone truly masters stoicism in a romantic context, when they sit in quiet self-possession instead of emotional dependency, they expose a truth. You no longer need their validation. You no longer crave their presence. That realization is seismic. In Stoic Relationships we learn that the only validation that matters is self-validation. In Stoicism we cultivate inner equilibrium so that external fluctuations, emotional reactions, messages unread, midnight pings, they don't unsettle us. This is what makes calmness an act of revolution in love. You weren't performing serenity, you were embodying sovereignty. Have you ever reached that moment where your absence speaks louder than any explanation you once gave? Silence became the final message, the only one needed. And in that moment you ceased to negotiate your value. You decided instead to radiate it. And they felt lodged in a liminal space where your silence became a mirror they couldn't resist staring into. They tried to chase. They tried to please. And that shift shatters expectations. Because most people learn love through reaction, escalate, reply, explain, argue, repeat. But what happens when you don't play the same game? When you choose justice and silence over justice and expression? They freeze. Their mind no longer follows your patterns, no longer anticipates triggers. They lose alignment. That disconnect becomes addictive to them, because now nobody else seems to match that quiet strength. In Stoic relationships, what matters is emotional ownership. You won't fix everything. This is the calm that cracks their soul, not your silence as absence, but your silence as equilibrium and emotional elevation. You didn't disappear, you transcended. And in that transcendence, you revealed something more terrifying than chaos, a peace so whole that it demanded confrontation not from you, but from them. Because at the core of dark detachment is a paradox. Power doesn't chase. It magnetizes. And when you exist in that stillness, rooted, solidified, unmoved, you recalibrate what power means in love. They expected collapse, they got composure. They expected reaction, they got resolution. And that resolution, your disappearance from their script, echoed louder than any argument ever could. Have you ever marveled at how someone who once chased you now chases the idea of you? That chase isn't about logic. It's about existential dissonance. How did you become a mystery in a world that taught them to expect answers? In Stoicism, we don't need their questions or their explanations. We need our own clarity. Our calm is not capitulation, it is mastery. You held space for peace instead of emotional outpouring. And in that space you reclaimed your identity. Because once you internalize that self-worth is not negotiable, once your Stoic relationships philosophy becomes lived truth, they feel tiny in comparison. Their drama becomes noise. Their pleas become meaningless whispers, and the silence you offer becomes the hardest threshold to cross. They may cry out, they may slide into guilt or nostalgia. Because silence isn't empty anymore, it's your final act of self-respect. And what cracks them most is the realization that you never needed them to define your peace. Your peace defined them. So they stand at the edge of your stillness, and realize they lost not someone who gave too much, but someone who grew too much. Someone who didn't argue their value because they embodied it. And that embodiment? It ripples. It reverberates in their mind when they're alone, at 2 a.m., scrolling past your photo. It reverberates in the pause between messages they send but never press send. And it reverberates in the cold space their denial once filled. They wanted confrontation, they got transcendence. They wanted closure, they got calm. They wanted drama, they got dignity. In that shift, dark detachment becomes an energy so addictive they find themselves chasing the end of a story you ended without words. And you? You're transformed, not broken, not bitter, not absent, but elevated. And as they crack under the weight of your silence, it has nothing to do with your words. It has everything to do with who you became in not speaking. That is the power. That is the calm that cracks their soul. 2. Ghosting with grace. Haunting with power. Have you ever walked away from someone not because you didn't care, but because you cared too much to stay? Have you ever ghosted not out of cruelty, but out of clarity? Understanding that staying would mean playing their game, instead of living yours? Picture this, you disappear with intention, not in anger, not in confusion, but with the serene dignity of someone who has transcended emotional dependency. You don't slam doors. You don't leave with fireworks. You don't deliver ultimatums or explanations. You simply close the chapter gently, without drama. And what you leave behind isn't emptiness. It's a vacuum of their own making, filled with their questions, their regrets. They're echoes of what once felt safe. That's what ghosting with grace really means, not vanishing into nothing, but elevating into something they can't reach. Because when you walk away clean, calm, controlled, you rewrite the emotional script. You go from being a chapter they thought they could skip, to becoming the entire plot they can't stop thinking about. And that haunting. And in Stoic relationships, this kind of emotional ownership is the ultimate form of self-respect. When they chase you after you've already moved on, it's not because they've healed. It's because they realize you never belonged to them in the first place. You belong to yourself. People expect closure. They expect answers. They expect breakdowns and explanations as currency for their confusion. But what happens when you refuse to transact in chaos? What happens when your silence doesn't leave them angry? but leaves them questioning everything they thought they knew. That's when the haunting begins. Every time they scroll your name but don't message. Every time they replay a memory but can't reconcile it with your absence. It's not guilt, they tried to outrun that too. It's discomfort. Cognitive dissonance. Because you weren't predictable. You weren't the version of you that stayed when disrespected. You weren't the version who explained until their throat was dry. You were the metamorphosis they didn't expect. The ghost they didn't think would leave with such calm. So they get pulled into the feedback loop of wondering, did they ever mean it? Did they ever care? And that loop is exactly the haunting you become. That emotional chase isn't love. It's confusion craving resolution. But there is no resolution to someone who outgrew the need for closure. That kind of detachment flips the emotional currency. Instead of chasing for answers, they chase the idea of you. Instead of driving to confront the past, they replay your absence. And haunting is the whisper of your growth echoing in their insecurity. In Stoic relationships, you learn not to negotiate toxicity. You learn to exit without looking back. And the moment they realize you did that, not out of spite but out of strength, they feel it in their bones. They see that the person they assumed would always wait, who always checked in, who always folded, they're gone. That space is sacred now. Sacred to your evolution. And that sacred void? It torments them. Because they were comfortable with the version of you that tolerated. They weren't ready for the version of you that transcends. And as much as they criticize ghosting, what they fear is that it works. And that transformation becomes your legacy. When Stoic relationships teach you your worth isn't defined by presence or reaction, you become unreachable. Not because you disappeared, the world still has you. But because you live beyond their access. You carried your own flame out of the room instead of waiting for someone to light it. And that act, quiet, composed, irreversible, is the haunting they never saw coming. So what do you do after? You stay grounded in your peace. You don't reply to desperation. You don't justify absence. You don't entertain guilt or nostalgia disguised as remorse. You remain stoic. You remain sovereign. You remain detached. Because ghosting with grace isn't your last act, it's your first statement. This relationship no longer dictates your emotional landscape. And haunting with power isn't about punishing them, it's the after effect of you reclaiming your narrative. Their obsession? It's confusion demanding resolution. But there is no more resolution. The book is closed. You don't need to reopen it for them, or for yourself. You've evolved. You've elevated. You've become the still point in a storm they can't parse. And that is the addictive energy of dark detachment. This is real stoicism in relationships. Real peace in departure. Real power in absence. Your calm isn't their submission. It's your sovereignty. Your silence isn't courtesy. It's your boundary. Your ghosting isn't avoidance, it's ascension. At this point, if this section spoke to you, feel free to like and comment, number 1, so I know you're with me, and if you haven't yet subscribed, subscribe now to step into more life-shifting concepts like this. Because reclaiming your energy starts with being intentional about where you invest it. 3. You were the flame. Now you're the burn. Even manipulated, until one day it flickered? And when it did, instead of reigniting the connection with desperation or explanation, you chose something far stronger. You became the burn they can't forget. Imagine love as fire. It consoles, it illuminates, it provides comfort. You were the sunrise in their life, predictable, radiant, habitual. In that casual disregard, your flame turned into consequence. You didn't burn them out of vengeance. You burned them with the truth of what's possible when warmth is mishandled. In Stoicism, we understand that reactive love is temporary. True love is measured by inner fire that doesn't diminish in absence or collapse in chaos. But when someone treats your flame as disposable, you eventually recognize that warmth given to the unworthy combusts within, not because you are weak, but because they refused refinement. And so you withdraw, not your flame, but your tolerance for misuse. That withdrawal, calm and resolute, becomes the burn. They may attempt to relight you. They may chase explanations or apologies. But apologies can't recreate lost heat. And explanations? They're just smoke after the fire's gone. The burn remains as memory, as scar, as reminder of everything they failed to protect. What's haunting them is not rejection but metamorphosis. They remember the light you offered, but now they sense the burn that came when love was taken as default instead of treasure. It's haunting because it strips away their illusions about possession. They realize you weren't just comfortable to them, you were sacred. And you offered that sacredness freely. Then they broke it. Now they feel the burn in every situation where they expected the same flame, every new person, every comparison. It's never you. You were flame and they let flame become ordinary. So now, you're not optional anymore, you're unforgettable. People chase flame for passion, but they haunt burn for regret. And you embody the regret. You aren't setting fire to their heart. You are simply stepping away with integrity. The burn is collateral damage from their own failure to value what was given. That kind of power doesn't require drama. It doesn't need salacious confrontation. It operates silently through presence and absence both. You don't need to curse their ignorance. They feel it when other people don't match your energy. They feel it when their comfort zone fails to replicate your warmth. That burn is permanent. It haunts because it's not conditioned on time. It's rooted in their memory of feeling safe, appreciated, cherished, and realizing none of that was taken seriously. So now your presence in their thought loops becomes seismic. The stone you threw didn't crack the glass. You threw the fire, and the glass shattered itself trying to contain it. That's why detachment fueled by dignity is so unstoppable. When you become flame to someone who cannot hold fire, you inevitably become the burn they carry forever. And that burn? It's not their fault, it's their consequence. Yet you don't dwell in revenge. You rise in remembrance of your worth. In Stoicism, we are taught that internal flame is not given lightly. But it's not to be extinguished either. We are custodians, not keepers of others' emotional maturity. You carried fire. They weren't ready. So you withdrew. They now burn in confusion, nostalgia, regret. That regret seeks closure, seeks imagery, seeks applause. But Stoic relationships don't crave closure, they embody resolution in action. They move forward with artistry, with alignment. That burn is not pain. It's presence, turned inward, forcing reflection. And when others cross your path who don't measure up to your standard, the burn reminds you, you left their energy in the ruin of what could have been. That burn acts as magnet for growth, not for remorse. Your energy is your legacy, and when you leave flame behind, you leave lesson. The burn they carry? It is proof they lost more than heat. They lost integrity, warmth, constancy. That loss becomes the magnetic echo, the emotional adrenaline that even they can't chase away. So what does that look like on your side? You exist quietly, brilliantly. You don't stoke drama. You don't revisit the embers. You simply live in your truth, your values, your continued warmth for those worthy. Your flame still burns, not for them, but for yourself. And that flame, controlled, resilient, sovereign, becomes a repellent to toxicity, a beacon to alignment. People who don't deserve your fire learn to respect its absence. People who do deserve it feel its authenticity. You don't promise heat. You embody it. And they may feel that absence fiercely, but you never gave sectioned warmth, you gave depth. They can't recreate you with gestures or words. So when you shift from being flame to being burn, you shift from love offered to power earned. They chase not flame anymore, they chase the burn. They chase what they lost. And you don't chase back. It must be earned. You taught through detachment. You didn't scream your value. You lived it. And now nothing they find can outshine the heat they once took. In Stoic relationships, we don't bind flame to people who don't comprehend its weight. We bind flame to truth, to growth, to presence that resonates beyond proximity. Your flame was their comfort. But you live in real warmth. You know that flame doesn't beg. Flame radiates. And when you become the burn someone else burned themselves against, you stop seeking validation. You start living validation. The addiction they feel? That's the energy of dark detachment in motion, the kind that makes them wonder, ache, reach, not because you cultivated need, but because you became clarity. Because you stopped giving flame to someone reckless enough to take it without care. Because now. 4. Crowned in distance. Worshipped in regret. Have you ever stepped into your own worth so quietly, so fully, that your absence became their gravestone of regret? Imagine you wore your grace like a crown, not flashy, but immovable, and the moment you quietly distanced yourself, you didn't vanish. You ascended. The distance between you and them became a throne built from self-respect. You didn't broadcast your departure. You didn't dramatize the boundaries. You simply made yourself unavailable to those who failed to recognize the crown you carried. And what they experienced wasn't loss. It was the shockwave of your elevation. In Stoic Relationships, we learn that boundaries are not punishments. They are declarations. You didn't distance to hurt them. You distanced to reclaim your kingdom. And in doing so, you became royalty they never realized they had. That withdrawal didn't shrink you. It crowned you. So they started worshipping that reflection. They sought your attention in mirrors, memories, other people, but it never filled the throne. They missed not just the presence but the power they stopped receiving. And regret doesn't follow someone who needed them, it follows someone who needed themselves more. The irony of dark detachment is that by wearing your distance like a crown, you raise the price of your access. You become invaluable. In Stoicism, we are taught that your value is inherent. You elevated your peace above their chaos. You elevated your standards above their expectations. You elevated your presence to call everyone else's participation into question. Now they stand in the gallery of your absence, worshipping the throne they never honored. They worship your distance because distance was your decision, not theirs. And that kind of power? It isn't given. It's earned. It's nurtured. It's amplified in every silent moment they assumed you'd remain. You didn't vanish. You took your light off display. You didn't cower. You cultivated calm. That calm is now the vacancy they feel in rooms, in routines you once inhabited. Every echo of laughter they chase, every conversation they rehearse, every almost you they compare, they can't recreate the throne you now occupy. That throne of your essence, your boundary, your sovereignty. So they regret. And that regret becomes whispering worship. They admire what they lost in silence. They're haunted not by what you said but by what you withheld, your presence, your attention, your validation. They chase to see if the throne you left open might still welcome them. But you don't lower your crown. You don't reopen the gates. Because royal caliber doesn't accept second-rate admission. You're not cold. You're chosen. Chosen by yourself first. And staying detached ensures your dignity stays intact. In Stoicism, we are taught that loss is inevitable but suffering is optional. So they suffer in regret, because your distance doesn't yield. Their regret becomes worship, their longing becomes habit. They scroll your name. They revisit your memory. And that makes your energy addictive, not because you withhold, but because you withhold with purpose. Not because you disappear, but because you transcend. Not because you hurt them. You cherish your own standard above someone else's apology. You choose peace above pressure to forgive without worth. You become crown while they mend regret. That regret becomes worship. They bow at the memory of your depth. At the echo of your presence in absence. At the gravity you held even while you let go. That's dark detachment turning sorrow into shrine. That's self-respect turned right. That's the addictive energy of someone who walked revolution silently. Who stepped out of someone else's expectation and into their own sovereignty. And now, as they search for closure in phantoms, you live in clarity. You didn't just leave. You leveled up. You didn't hide. You became canopy, not court. You didn't fade. You ascended. And they don't chase flame anymore. They chase your throne. Because only someone who knew what royalty looked like. And subscribe to follow along as we continue to break free through Stoic relationships and Stoicism in the rest of this journey. Your energy deserves intention and elevation. 5. When the unbothered become unforgettable. Have you ever noticed how someone who walks away almost too calmly, without drama, without pleas, can become the most magnetic presence in your thoughts? When they predicted chaos, but got silence. When they expected desperation, but got distance. And that distance, that composure you practiced, turned you from background warmth into unforgettable essence. In Stoicism, we are taught that emotional detachment is not disengagement, it is discernment. When you stop reacting to drama and instead become anchored in your own integrity. You shift the emotional power dynamic. You stop being the willing participant in someone else's chaos and start being the singular voice they can't ignore, even in your absence. This is the energy of rising above desperation, of turning your equanimity into energy that ripples inside others. In Stoic relationships, that level of self-possession creates paradoxical influence. You're everywhere, yet nowhere near their grasp. You're relevant, yet irrelevant to their drama. You're the calibration point, the standard by which everyone else falls short. Because you taught boundaries not in warnings, but in behavior. You carried calm so completely that reactions looked weak. You offered distance so fully that their need felt hollow. They start chasing not for resolution, but for affirmation that what they lost was real. And the more you resist responding, but because their emotional center isn't tied to anyone's consistency. You are complete without invitation, available without desperation. And they feel that absence like a weight they can't properly name. They find themselves wondering, when did I stop holding? What made her step back so fully? He never talked down. You begin to embody a frequency people feel, not because they need you, but because they once expected you. They walk into spaces where your echoes used to live, your old bedroom, your coffee spot. Your silence on their notifications, and instead of noticing loss, they feel your resonance. And every time they chase someone else, you come back stronger in contrast. They realized they were chasing comfort, but you turned into freedom. They chased familiarity, you embodied absence that healed. They took your availability for granted. Now your absence becomes irreplaceable. That is what turns unbothered into unforgettable. When your transformation becomes the mirror they stare at in every new connection and realize no one matches that level of embodiment. Because while they distracted themselves with novelty, they missed someone moving toward peace, toward sovereignty. And no dopamine hit, no message, no promise can replicate someone who stopped waiting long before they complained. In Stoic relationships, that kind of emotional embodiment is the dark detachment that draws back, not through manipulation. They begin projecting all the questions onto your silence. And it terrifies them more than confrontation ever could. Because uncertainty is an itch they can't scratch. Absence is an echo they can't drown. Regret is the famine they can't feed. But by your consistency with self, not predictable in expectation, but predictable in presence of power. That power shift is addictive to anyone who once took your consistency for granted. That is the quiet branding of someone unbothered. They leave expectation behind, they carry dignity within, and they become unforgettable. You taught through detachment. You healed through distance. You rose through refusal of emotional investment without return. And in that rise, you became energy that demands remembrance, not because of what you shouted, but because of what you silently owned. And that energy? It pierces insecurity, it unsettles narcissism, it unsettles expectation. It forces those around you to ask, how did someone become so untouched by what I thought defined them? And universally consistent in self-love and self-boundary. That is what makes being unbothered more powerful than any argument. Because arguments they can wage. Peace they can't decode. When you stop amplifying presence and instead refine your absence, people don't forget, they fantasize. They cease to seek validation from you and instead search the void your elevation left. That void? That's the echo chamber of regret. And they can fill it with poems, replacements, photos, excuses, but nothing matches the gravity of someone who walked away with calm, with certainty, with everything they needed. In Stoicism, we're taught that independence and internal peace are the highest forms of integrity. When Stoic relationships guide you to that place, your power shifts from pleading to embodiment. And embodiment is the art of becoming unbothered so completely that your energy is addictive, uncompromised, unforgettable. Then they realize they never chased closure. They chased confirmation. Confirmation that what they lost was real. Confirmation that you existed outside their expectations. And that confirmation? It can only be found in reflection, not reaction. So they look to mirrors, to mutual friends, to memories. They replay moments until they feel the gravity of what you embodied. 6. The echo they feel in their bones. When someone leaves not with a shout but with a silence so resonant it reverberates through the quiet spaces of memory, they become a living echo, an imprint beyond the scope of explanation. That ripple starts small, a missing laugh, a vacant corner, a dull ache at midnight, but it grows. It pulses in the chest, in the breath, in the random moments when their world should feel complete. Yet something essential is missing. Because while presence can be replicated, resonance cannot. In Stoicism, we speak of indifference to external disturbances. But this kind of detachment isn't indifference, it's intentional absence that reverberates. You stepped away, not to spite, but to survive. Not to punish, but to preserve. And in doing so, you became that echo, not a ghost, not a shadow, but a frequency that lives inside the muscle memory of longing. You carried emotional maturity into silence. And that composed vacancy forced them to confront the depth of what they once dismissed. That depth doesn't vanish with distance, it amplifies. It becomes a reminder that love wasn't just given, it was embodied. And now that embodiment cannot leave, even when you physically do. They feel your absence not in guilt, in nostalgic pangs that recur without warning. That feeling is not a wound, it's a whisper of their own misalignment with you. In Stoic relationships, we learn that reactions don't heal attachment, they reaffirm it. That's why the echo in their bones doesn't ignite when they hear your name in protest. It ignites when they realize your peace no longer depends on their permission. Then they scroll your profile, not to reconnect, but to calibrate their regret. They trace old memories, not to relive, but to reassess. And in every search they carry the echo of someone who once stood tall and calm, whose worth was self-certified, whose departure revealed how unprepared they were to hold that presence. That echo becomes louder in silence precisely because it wasn't born from expectation, it was born from elevation. When you embody Stoicism, when you detach not to dissociate but to dominate your emotional sovereignty, you create resonance that defies distance. It surfaces in restless nights, in habits of checking your last scene, in déjà vu moments that trigger tears they've hidden. They don't hear you speak. They feel you pause. That pause is your echo. And they chase not to reconnect, but to understand why silence moved them more than presence ever did. It's not complexity. It's counterintuitive. You taught them that power isn't argument but absence, that emotional permanence doesn't require contact, that longing doesn't require intimacy. That lesson can't be taught with voice. It must be demonstrated in stillness. And when you demonstrate it wholeheartedly, you become the one they can't unsubscribe from mentally. You are stored in their internal narrative. Your echo becomes the marker of wasted opportunity, of boundaries unseen, of love miscalculated. You were the note they failed to match. That echo wears them, it unravels their denial, it destabilizes their logic, it undermines their attempts at rewriting history. Because Stoic relationships teach that emotional ownership isn't toxic, it's truth. And you owned your truth silently. You didn't chase redemption. You became the echo they chased. You didn't beg for understanding. You embodied understanding without explanation. You didn't stay to prove yourself, you stayed to know yourself. And now, even in absence, you lost someone who didn't need to stay to be unforgettable. That echo conscripts empathy. It enlists memory. It overwhelms logic. It rewrites regrets. Because when someone becomes an echo, they rewrite the emotional architecture of what attachment used to define. They become the standard. They become the longing. They become the void that eventually defines all others. And none of that is manufactured. None of that is flogged for attention. It is the byproduct of dark detachment done right. When you stop performing to be remembered, and start living to be respected, you create a presence that transcends proximity. That echo isn't spite. It's sovereignty. It isn't pain. It's power. And it doesn't require validation to exist. It only requires consistency. So yes, some echoes fade. But some echoes embed. They reside in the neural fabric of longing. And they detect the absence of that elevation in every relationship that follows. That detection, painful as it is the strongest proof you ever were. That proof isn't given. It's perceived. And it lasts long after you've moved on. That's the ultimate addictive energy of dark detachment. The echo they feel deep in their bones, long after everything else has tried to fill your space. You are not in their life anymore, but they carry you within it. You are not a chapter. You are an echo. If this struck something real inside you, feel free to like and comment. Number 1. If you like this video, and go ahead and subscribe so you can keep stepping into Stoic relationships, Stoicism wisdom, and content that empowers your emotional sovereignty. Because your echo is your legacy, and your peace deserves integrity. We've journeyed through an exploration of dark detachment where silence becomes sovereignty, calm becomes magnetism, and absence becomes architecture. We began by understanding how a peaceful calm cracks their soul, not through confrontation, but through a depth of composure that breaks patterns they never knew they were stuck in. We moved into ghosting with grace, where departure becomes not drama but declaration, leaving behind not emptiness but an emotional imprint they chase long after you've stepped out of their reach. Then we turn flame into burn, recognizing that warmth unappreciated can transform into a lesson they carry daily, not burned out of spite, but burned into consequence. From there we saw how crowning yourself in distance builds a regal presence they worship in absence and regret, because dignity withheld is worth more than presence begged for. We uncovered how becoming unbothered doesn't strip you of feeling, it crowns you in authenticity and attracts longing not through noise, but through unshakable internal integrity. Ultimately, we landed in the echo they feel in their bones, long after your story has ended, where your presence no longer exists in form but pulses in memory, in nostalgia. Transformation rooted in Stoicism and Stoic relationships yields a form of energy more addictive, more haunting, more magnetic than any emotional frenzy or pursuit ever could be. This energy doesn't come from making noise. It's not about getting reactions or driving closure. Its power is in refusing to be dependent, refusing to be reactive, refusing to be swayed by someone else's emotional currency. It's about anchoring your worth inside your own peace and letting your behavior, presence, and silence broadcast that truth. In these dynamics, there's no room for regret for you, not because you were cold, but because you were clear. You didn't vanish. You evolved. You didn't shrink. You sovereigned. It wasn't about depriving them, it was about preserving yourself. Their regret, obsession, longing, they exist only because you existed first, wholly and without compromise. And now that you've read this, if the energy of dark detachment resonates with your truth, let it guide your next chapter. Know that valuing yourself isn't selfish, it's sacred. Know that silence isn't absence, it's ascension. Know that being calm isn't weakness, it's mastery. You have the choice to spend energy proving value. Let your absence speak volumes they can't unhear. Let your consistency rewrite what they assumed they could ignore. And in time, They'll realize the person they once dismissed became the standard they can't replace. But you? Stay untouchable. Stay regal. Stay radiant in your sovereignty. This is not just a script or a lesson. It is an invitation to stop chasing validation, to stop explaining your worth, to step into a power rooted in stillness, dignity, and wisdom. It is your moment to rewrite the narrative on your terms. To build relationships defined by mutual depth instead of emotional debt. To become magnetic not through drama but through alignment with self. If dark detachment taught us anything, it's that the most addictive energy comes not from flame, not from noise, not from chaos, but from composed evolution unapologetically anchored in self-worth. And as you walk this path, your resonance becomes your legacy, quiet, clear, unstoppable. Your scars become evidence of strength. Your silence becomes the message. Your absence becomes the truth. And the only thing left is to live that truth. This concludes our journey. The energy you carry next is no longer dictated by their reaction but by your conviction. So go forward in peace. Go forward in clarity. Go forward as the one they feel, even when you're not there.